American submariners never knew phantom sonar signals were their last transmission. American submariners never knew phantom sonar signals were their last transmission. Night at sea, metal ribs creaking, air tasting like oil and salt. The captain leans over the sonar console. A steady ping, then another. Not from any charted ship, not from any known enemy. For 47 seconds, the sonar sang a pattern no man could place. The men logged it. They kept listening. Minutes later, the last transmission left the boat. Silence swallowed the channel. Imagine being 600 feet under, hull groaning, lights low, every man trained to read the ocean like a clock. Imagine a sound that should not exist. Imagine writing it down, knowing that record might be the last thing anyone ever reads from you. That is where our story begins. This hook gives you the promise of the title. It gives you the scene. It gives you a concrete, chilling moment, a 47-second burst of phantom pings logged moments before a submarine fell silent. It gives you the question that will haunt every chapter. What sent that sound? Was it a secret weapon, a sonar malfunction, or something the ocean keeps to itself? We start with that unanswered pulse and we follow it into history, into testimony, into theory, and into the dark. The missing signal the Pacific night was silent, too silent for wartime. The submarine USS Celian II drifted beneath the waves, its engines humming like a heartbeat under steel. The men inside moved quietly, their voices low, the rhythm of routine keeping their nerves from cracking. They had done this for months, patrol, listen, wait. Yet on that night in late 1944, something changed. Lieutenant Commander Richard Haynes leaned over the sonar console, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand. The sonar operator, Petty Officer Myers, stared at the glowing green screen, his eyes unblinking. A steady ping rolled through the room. 1, 2, 3, then... Something irregular. Myers frowned. "Captain, we're picking up a return off starboard bow bearing 210. But it's not constant." Haynes stepped closer. "Submarine?" "Too soft for that, sir. It's..." Repeating but not echoing. "It's like it's calling back." That phrase, calling back, would later appear in the last radio log of the Celian II. A signal that didn't reflect. It responded. The sonar kept pulsing, each tone slightly higher than the last, like something alive adjusting its voice. The men leaned in, mesmerized and uneasy. For 47 seconds, the signal danced through the cabin. Then, silence. The line went flat. Haynes ordered a recording, his hand trembling slightly. "Tag it, log it, and keep listening." The crew obeyed, but no one spoke. They didn't have to. The air in the room already carried the weight of something unnatural. Above them, the Pacific stretched endless and black. Below, miles of darkness pressed against the hull. The submarine was a steel coffin in an ocean that kept secrets well. Hours later, the Celian II surfaced briefly for transmission. The operator sent out the last confirmed message. Unidentified sonar pattern recorded. Investigation continues. All systems normal. That message reached the nearest naval station at 0341. Then nothing. The next scheduled check-in never came. 3 days later, command flagged the Celian II as overdue. Standard wartime protocol meant radio silence could stretch for days, so at first, no one panicked. But when no signal came by the 6th day, a search order was issued. Patrol planes scoured the sea. Destroyers combed the coordinates. Nothing, not a flare, not an oil slick. Just ocean. When the crew's families were notified, the message was brief and cold. Missing. Presumed lost. No explanation, no wreck. No closure. And yet the story didn't end there. A week after the disappearance, a British listening station near the Solomon Islands intercepted a faint sonar burst, identical to the Celian II's phantom signal. It was recorded at 2:47 a.m., the same pattern, same tone sequence. The strange part? The signal came from an area hundreds of miles from where the submarine vanished. At first, command dismissed it as coincidence, maybe a Japanese decoy experiment. But technicians at Pearl Harbor reviewed both audio samples side by side. The match was nearly perfect. 2 signals, same frequency structure, same modulation anomalies, spaced days apart, and no human source identified. That was the moment the Navy classified the entire case. Files were sealed under operational security. Families never saw the transcripts again. Years later, A declassified note surfaced from an intelligence officer who reviewed the Sea Lion 2 recordings in early 1945. It read simply, "Sonar anomaly does not match known mechanical, biological, or environmental patterns. Further study required." That further study never made it to public record. But within the submarine community, whispers began. Sailors talked about ghost pings, about sounds that mimicked their own sonar, luring them off course. Some believed it was Japanese acoustic counterintelligence, machines that could reflect signals in false patterns to confuse Allied vessels. Others thought it was something older, something not man-made. An aging sonar technician named Bill Tanner later told a journalist, "The first time you hear something answer your ping, you stop breathing. It's not supposed to happen. It means either you're chasing something, or something's chasing you." That quote would never make it into official history, but it would haunt every man who ever went back down into the depths. The Navy did locate one object in the area 6 months after the war ended, a fragment of pressure hull steel, heavily corroded, edges fused by intense heat. Analysts could not explain the burn pattern. It didn't match torpedo damage or implosion signatures. Some called it a relic of the Sea Lion 2. Others said it belonged to a wreck from years before. The truth was, no one could tell, and that brings us to the turning moment, the detail buried in the recovered sonar logs, the final notation written in Haynes's handwriting. The words read, "Signal repeating, sounds human, request confirmation." Those were the last words known to be written aboard the submarine. Historians later tried to recreate what could have happened next. Maybe the Sea Lion 2 went deeper, chasing the phantom echo. Maybe a mechanical fault followed, leading to catastrophic collapse. Or maybe the sonar wasn't reflecting at all. Maybe something in the water was calling back, drawing them further from their route, deeper into pressure they couldn't survive. But there's something else. When divers from a later expedition revisited the region decades later, their sonar equipment, modern, precise, detected faint rhythmic pulses on nearly the same frequency as the 1944 recording. When they replayed it through modern speakers, the pattern still formed a haunting sequence of tones. 3 short pings, a pause. Then 2 long ones. A researcher on that dive, Dr. Leland Frost, described it simply. "It's like someone down there is still replying. And here lies the unsettling truth. No one ever confirmed the source. Not then, not now." The pattern keeps appearing. Sometimes it's logged by civilian research vessels, sometimes by undersea communication lines that catch strange anomalies. Always the same rhythm, always the same range. If the Sea Lion 2 was lost to accident, its signal should have ended with it. But if something else was listening that night, and if it's still out there, then those men might not have been sending their last transmission. They might have been answering one. The ocean doesn't give back what it takes. It buries metal, memory, and truth under miles of cold pressure. And every time the sonar pings out and something pings back, someone remembers the Sea Lion 2. Next, we follow that sound, across maps, through archives, and into the minds of those who heard it again. Because what disappeared in 1944 might not have vanished at all. It might just be waiting for someone else to answer. Echoes in the deep rain fell over Pearl Harbor in short, stinging bursts when the first report about the phantom signal resurfaced. It was 1952, 8 years after the Sea Lion 2 vanished, and the Navy's new Acoustic Research Division was reviewing wartime sonar logs to develop early submarine detection systems. A young engineer named Thomas Ellery stumbled upon the old reel labeled Unidentified Transmission USS Sea Lion 2. The tape whirred to life. Static first, then the low, hollow pulse of the sea. And then those 47 seconds of patterned sound, soft, deliberate, almost rhythmic. Ellery frowned. He'd heard whale song, propeller resonance, thermal noise, but this was structured. The sound rose in intervals like someone striking submerged bells in sequence. When the recording ended, the room felt colder. He replayed it again, then slowed it down. Beneath the audible tones, faint micro-echoes rippled, a secondary pulse, almost like an answer layered inside the main signal. Ellery leaned closer to the speaker, heart pounding. There it was again. An echo inside the echo. He logged the finding and sent it up the chain. 2 days later, the tape vanished from his desk. His supervisor told him to drop it, that the Navy had already concluded its investigation. But late that night, he received an anonymous envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single sentence typed on military stationery. "It's not gone. They're still hearing it." That note changed the course of his career. Over the next decade, Ellery became obsessed with locating every recorded instance of that same sonar pattern. He found 3, each captured years apart, thousands of miles away, but sharing the exact acoustic fingerprint. One came from the Philippine Sea in 1947, one from the Mariana Trench in 1950, and one, curiously, from an undersea cable near San Diego in 1951. Each time, the sound appeared for less than a minute, and then vanished. By the mid-1950s, the Cold War had turned the ocean into a theater of shadows. Submarines prowled everywhere, listening and being listened to. Yet among the classified chatter, one internal memo between U.S. and British naval intelligence hinted at a continuing anomaly in the Pacific, what they called Echo Pattern 37B. It was flagged not as a threat, but as unresolved acoustic behavior of unknown origin. Ellery wasn't the only one haunted by it. One night in 1954, aboard the British submarine HMS Trenchant, sonar officer Malcolm Voss experienced it firsthand. His ship was conducting joint exercises with the U.S. near Guam when the familiar rhythmic pulses struck their receiver. The crew froze. Voss later described it as a voice made of metal and water, answering back from somewhere far below. When they triangulated the source, it seemed to come from nearly 2 miles beneath the seabed, an impossibility for any man-made craft. Command ordered them to move on, but Voss didn't. He secretly recorded the entire sequence on reel-to-reel tape. Decades later, when the recording leaked to civilian researchers, oceanographers at Woods Hole analyzed it using modern equipment. The results shocked them. The signal's harmonics matched those of a sonar transducer, but with fluctuations too precise to be mechanical. It behaved like an intelligent response system. Meanwhile, in naval archives, another forgotten detail surfaced. During the Celian II's final mission, it had been assigned to patrol a sector near an experimental communications test range, one involving long-range underwater acoustic transmissions. The project's codename, Project Murmur. Officially, Murmur was an attempt to bounce sonar waves across vast ocean distances for strategic communication. Unofficially, it was rumored to have picked up something answering from beyond its range. That connection between Murmur and the Celian II wasn't made public until the 1980s, when declassified documents revealed a chilling entry. Test array received external return, non-reflective, pattern identical to outbound pulse, inverted phase. Origin depth exceeds known limits, inverted phase. The signal wasn't bouncing back, it was replying in mirror form, like an echo that knew what it was imitating. Ellery's last known letter to a colleague ended with a line scribbled in red ink. "It's not us talking to the deep. It's the deep learning to talk back." From that point, strange coincidences began to multiply. Submarines reported brief equipment malfunctions when crossing old coordinates tied to the Celian II. Hydrophones picked up shadow transmissions, signal fragments that resembled sonar messages, but came from nowhere traceable. And in at least 2 cases, the ghost signal mimicked identification codes belonging to vessels long destroyed. It was as if the ocean itself was remembering. In 1961, during an experimental deep-sea dive, a civilian research sub named Argus recorded another anomaly. The pilot described hearing what sounded like overlapping sonar, one layer standard, the other echoing seconds later, slightly distorted. When he played the recording on the surface, he froze. The distorted layer carried faint human voices, unintelligible, warped by pressure, but undeniably there. One of the researchers noted, "It's as if the sonar caught ghosts of sound. Transmissions trapped in time." The Argus team later discovered the frequency used in their sonar matched exactly with the Celian II's last logged channel. After that, the recordings were confiscated by Navy officials and locked away. Ellery was never heard from again after 1963. Some say he was recruited for classified oceanic research. Others say he vanished off the coast of California, his boat found drifting, instruments running, radio silent. Still, the echoes didn't stop. Fishermen began reporting strange acoustic bursts on their depth finders, patterns that seemed almost playful, repeating when they pinged back. Some divers swore they felt vibrations beneath them, pulsing like a heartbeat in the deep. And then came the discovery that reopened the case entirely. In 1978, a Japanese marine geologist studying undersea volcanic ridges near the Mariana Trench picked up the exact Celian-2 sonar pattern again. But this time the source appeared to move, descending deeper, then vanishing altogether. When his team graphed the data, the descent line formed a perfect spiral. A spiral, not a straight fall. That data reached American analysts within days. One of them reportedly muttered, "It's not sinking, it's signaling." The twist nobody expected came in 1980, when a retired communications officer, now in his 70s, revealed that just hours before the Celian-2's final message, 2 other submarines had picked up a faint transmission over emergency frequency 5160 kHz. The words were fragmented but clear enough to transcribe. "It's repeating the pattern, adjusting, seems to know us." That phrase never appeared in official logs. Every discovery seemed to answer one question only to raise another. If the ocean was merely reflecting signals, why did it adapt? If it was mechanical interference, why did it persist for decades? And if it wasn't, what was communicating through those tones that no man could explain? In the archives of the U.S. Naval Undersea Warfare Center lies a final entry, stamped, "Classified, do not duplicate." It reads, "Recommend discontinuation of deep acoustic testing in Sector 9. Subjective reports of personnel distress and auditory illusions. Phenomenon possibly linked to legacy event, USS Celian-2. Legacy event." The phrase lingers like a warning. As the years passed, most dismissed the story as superstition, a product of wartime nerves. But every now and then, a sonar operator somewhere in the world still reports an unidentified return. A pattern too familiar, too perfect to be coincidence. And when it appears, the old men of the sea still fall silent, remembering the boat that vanished after hearing its own echo. What if that echo never truly stopped? What if, somewhere in the dark below, something still waits, still listens, still answers? Next comes the search for proof. The expeditions that dared to trace that phantom frequency into the depths, and the men who claim to have found where it leads. Because the deeper we listen, the closer the answer seems to call. Witnesses and Whirlpool, the first survivor, came forward 30 years too late. In 1975, during a naval veterans reunion in San Diego, a frail man in his 50s stood before a crowd of old submariners and told a story that froze the room. His name was Chief Petty Officer Leonard Graves, a sonar technician once assigned to the USS Drum. He wasn't supposed to be alive, not according to the original records. But as it turned out, he had transferred off the Celian-2 just 10 days before it vanished. When Graves spoke, his voice trembled. "The last night I was aboard," he said, "we heard something through the hull. Not sonar, not an echo. It was like whispering metal. You could feel it in your bones." He paused, gripping the microphone with both hands. "We thought it was a pressure anomaly. But then the captain ordered the sonar shut off. Said we weren't the ones sending the pings anymore." The crowd fell silent. Even decades later, the memory unsettled them. These were men who had spent years underwater, hearing the sea breathe and roar around them. But what Graves described didn't belong to any world they knew. After the reunion, a journalist named Emily Shore approached him. She specialized in forgotten military disappearances and Cold War secrets. Her interviews with Graves became the spark that reignited public interest in the sea lion. The story was no longer buried in naval archives. It had a voice. Shore began collecting fragments of testimony from other veterans. A radio operator from the USS Tambor claimed his crew intercepted faint Morse-like bursts on the night the Celian-2 disappeared, too weak for translation, but unmistakably patterned. Another sailor remembered a classified memo distributed shortly after, warning all submarines in the Pacific to disregard anomalous sonar returns resembling human signal mimicry. The deeper Shore dug, the stranger it became. One engineer who worked for the Office of Naval Research told her, "The Navy tried to study it. They built a device to reproduce that sound pattern. Every time they powered it, the water in the test tanks vibrated out of sync, like something was responding from outside the container." By the late 1970s, Shore's investigation had gathered enough attention that a joint American-Japanese expedition was proposed to revisit the coordinates where the Celian-2 had last transmitted. Officially, the mission was geological research. Unofficially, it was a search for a ghost. The ship, Argo Maru, reached the site in June 1979. Modern sonar arrays swept the depths, mapping a silent world of trenches and cold ridges. For days, nothing unusual appeared. Then, on the sixth night, the sonar technician shouted for everyone to come see. On the monitor, a structure emerged. Circular, metallic, partially buried. The outline matched the size of a World War II submarine's pressure hull. But it wasn't resting flat. It was standing almost upright, nose down, embedded in silt. The crew cheered. They believed they had found the Sea Lion II. Cameras were lowered on steel cables. The images that came back were haunting. An eroded hull, portholes rimmed with corrosion, the faint outline of what looked like a serial number blurred by decades of sediment. But then something shifted. From the depths, the submersible microphone picked up a faint repeating tone. 3 short pulses. A pause, then 2 long ones. The same pattern. At first, the team thought it was interference. But the source was moving. The signal circled the wreck, then stopped. Divers on deck grew uneasy. Shore wrote later that she felt an unnatural pressure in her ears, like being underwater without moving. The sound continued for 47 seconds, the exact duration of the Sea Lion II's last recording, before vanishing completely. The next morning, when they replayed the audio, a faint voice could be heard beneath the final seconds of the tone. It was distorted, distant, almost broken by static. Some claimed it sounded like a man saying, "Hold course." Others heard, "Help us." The tape was confiscated when the expedition returned to port. Official reports listed it as instrumental anomaly, but several crew members swore under oath that the sound was real, and it didn't come from any machine they operated. Theories began spreading like ripples through dark water. Some said the submarine had discovered a natural phenomenon, an acoustic vortex created by unique geological conditions. Others whispered about secret weapons test gone wrong. But a handful of oceanographers had another idea, that deep-sea trenches could trap sound for decades, bouncing it back in fragments across time. They called it temporal resonance. If that were true, then the voice on the recording wasn't supernatural. It was historical. The Sea Lion II might have been calling from the past, its final distress signal echoing through layers of water and time until it surfaced again. Yet one question shattered that comfort. If the sound was simply trapped, why did it move? Weeks after the Argo Maru's voyage, Japanese researchers monitoring the same coordinates recorded another sonar burst, identical to the previous one, but this time, the signal originated 15 miles east. Something down there was shifting. When Emily Shore published her findings, the U.S. Navy denied every detail. They called her story an imaginative reconstruction. But within months, she began receiving anonymous phone calls, voices distorted, telling her to stop listening. Her home phone once played that same sequence of pings when she picked up the receiver. 3 short. Pause. 2 long. She vanished in 1981, her car found abandoned near the coast. Only her notebook remained, sealed in plastic inside the glove compartment. The last entry read, "The sound follows depth, not distance. It isn't trapped, it's tracking." By now, the Sea Lion II mystery had grown beyond wartime folklore. Oceanic researchers across the world began to detect similar bursts, always in remote, deep regions where light never touched. Some even suggested that the pattern corresponded to movements of deep-sea tectonic faults, but the timing didn't match. Others said it might be communication between unknown marine species. But among those who had heard the original Sea Lion II recording, there was a growing fear. Because the rhythm, once you heard it long enough, didn't just sound random. It sounded deliberate. It sounded like Morse, and when translated loosely, those same tones could form a single word: below. Every expert who reviewed that idea dismissed it as coincidence. Every sailor who heard it called it a warning. Years later, a classified Navy diver operation, Project Neptune Echo, was launched to descend into the trench believed to hold the Sea Lion II wreck. What they found was never publicly revealed, but one diver who retired early told his brother, "We saw lights down there, moving, like the sea was breathing." He never elaborated again. Somewhere in those depths, a recording continues to replay itself. Every few years, research hydrophones pick it up faintly, always the same pattern, always fading before any triangulation. The deeper the signal is tracked, the weaker it grows, until it disappears completely, as if slipping behind a wall of silence. And now, modern sonar networks occasionally report what experts call ghost returns, echoes that register as perfect reflections of their own pings, milliseconds apart, identical in every respect except one. The echo always ends. 2 beats early, the ocean remembers. The Sea Lion 2 may be rust and shadow now, but something still stirs where it sank. Something that answers when the living dare to listen. Next, we follow the unseen threads connecting these echoes to something bigger, a discovery that forced even the Navy to admit, for the first time, that the sea might not just reflect human sound. It might respond to it. Theories that would not die. By the time the 1980s arrived, the Sea Lion 2 mystery had transformed from a wartime footnote into an obsession whispered about in naval circles and late-night university labs. The ghost sonar wasn't folklore anymore, it was data. And data, unlike legends, refused to stay buried. In 1983, inside a low-lit laboratory at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, a group of researchers gathered around an old reel brought in from a forgotten Navy archive. On it was the original Sea Lion 2 sonar signal, digitized for the first time. They ran it through new acoustic analysis software, splitting the waveform layer by layer. What they found silenced the room. Hidden beneath the main tone, a secondary pattern emerged. A pulse that wasn't just random interference. It carried structured rhythm, micro-intervals that formed repeating mathematical sequences, primes, mirrored ratios, recursive loops. It was language, but not in any form humans had ever spoken. Dr. Marianne Keller, an ocean acoustician who led the team, described it later as a conversation between sound and silence. The signal was too organized to be geological, too complex to be accidental. But if it was artificial, it was operating on an intelligence far beyond human sonar design of the 1940s. When Keller's findings were submitted for peer review, government officials arrived before publication. They confiscated the tapes, citing national security. She never received her research back. 2 months later, Keller resigned. Her last written note in her personal log read simply, "They're not afraid of what it is. They're afraid it's still active." While official science retreated, unofficial theories multiplied. Some believed the Sea Lion 2 had stumbled upon a deep-sea magnetic anomaly, a rift in Earth's crust emitting electromagnetic waves that interfered with sonar. Others claimed it was evidence of an early Cold War experiment gone wrong, perhaps an American prototype that had sunk before being acknowledged. But one theory lingered in the darker corners of classified briefings, a theory not about what the signal was, but who sent it first. Documents declassified decades later hinted that, months before the Sea Lion 2 disappeared, American intelligence intercepted Japanese naval transmissions describing the voice in the trench. One message, translated by cryptographers, read, "Our subs report unnatural sonar mimicry. Pattern repeats when challenged. Depth impossible to reach." Both sides, it seemed, had heard the same thing. Still, there was one more layer, the unexplainable. Those who worked with sonar long enough noticed that the human body reacted strangely to the Sea Lion 2 recording. Some felt nausea. Others swore they heard faint whispers buried under the tone. Scientists later found that specific frequencies in the pattern resonated unnaturally with the human ear canal, producing a physical sensation of motion. But a handful of listeners described something else entirely, a whispering presence, soft and distant, as if someone was speaking just beyond comprehension. The rumor spread that the Sea Lion 2 hadn't just been lost to the sea, it had been taken by something that learned how to speak through the water. In 1987, a classified meeting was held at a remote naval facility in Alaska. Among the attendees were physicists, sonar engineers, and 2 psychologists specializing in sensory perception. The objective, to simulate the phantom sonar using controlled equipment. The room was lined with tanks of water, each connected to high-frequency transducers. When they activated the playback, instruments in the building began to malfunction. Pressure sensors spiked erratically, and one technician swore the water in the tanks rippled without physical disturbance. The test was aborted. The logbook was sealed. The project's name, Echo Gate, was later erased from all public records. But one surviving technician, decades later, broke silence. "We thought we were testing a recording," he said. But the water responded, as if it recognized the sound. Meanwhile, in civilian circles, conspiracy theorists painted bolder pictures. Some linked the Sea Lion 2 to accounts of deep ocean bioluminescent phenomena, vast glowing currents seen by sailors over the Mariana Trench. Others tied it to reports of electromagnetic disruptions in communication lines near the same coordinates. And one outlier hypothesis, published anonymously, proposed that the sonar wasn't just an acoustic signal, it was a kind of beacon, a key designed to open communication with something older than civilization. Keller's former assistant, who later published her notes online, revealed one chilling entry she had written. If sound travels forever in water, then every sonar ping is a message. We were not the first to send one. Maybe we just answered. The turning point came when a Soviet submarine, K-129, vanished mysteriously in the Pacific in 1968. Declassified intelligence reports years later confirmed that during the recovery operation, the U.S. deep-sea vessel Glomar Explorer picked up sonar echoes at the wreck site. Faint, familiar tones that matched the Sea Lion 2's pattern. The coincidence was buried in bureaucracy, dismissed as acoustic contamination, but a few analysts noticed the connection. That event reignited military interest. If the phenomenon could be predicted, perhaps it could be harnessed. For communication. Or for something darker. Then, in 1991, a NOAA research buoy stationed north of Guam picked up a low-frequency anomaly that matched the same harmonic pattern, but amplified 1,000-fold. The signal lasted for 6 minutes. Undersea cables in the area flickered with interference. Marine life in the region changed course en masse, scattering from a single unseen source. When the data was cross-referenced with old records, the coordinates aligned almost perfectly with the last known position of the Sea Lion 2. Every attempt to map the site since then has ended in failure. Equipment freezes. Data corrupts. Unmanned submersibles lose guidance. One drone's camera captured its own sonar screen flickering before the feed cut out completely. The final image showed faint light patterns twisting upward through the black water, as if the ocean itself were exhaling something alive. Even now, scientists argue. Some say it's pressure resonance. Others, a natural acoustic feedback loop. But every explanation collapses on one fact. The pattern doesn't decay like any known sound. It sustains itself. It repeats. Maybe that's why some old sailors still refuse to use active sonar in the Pacific at night. They say there's a certain frequency that, once transmitted, always gets an answer. And if you listen closely through the static of distant recordings, the ocean still hums. A pulse, faint but familiar. It rises. It falls. It waits. Theories try to end the story, but the sea never does. Next, we go to those who descended into the black water, the final divers who claim to have seen what the sonar was pointing to, and what was waiting in the dark when they followed the sound. After waves, the ocean has a memory, not the kind that fades with tides or years, but the kind that hides beneath silence, where every sound, every scream, and every sonar pulse still drifts, waiting for someone to listen again. In 1997, 52 years after the Sea Lion 2 vanished, a deep-sea exploration team led by Commander Isaac Monroe prepared to dive into the coordinates where the sonar signal had last been traced. It wasn't a military operation this time. It was science, wrapped in secrecy. Officially, they were studying undersea fault lines. Unofficially, the mission file was stamped with a single word: retrace. Monroe was an aging submariner, the kind of man who spoke little but whose eyes carried the exhaustion of things left unresolved. His father, Lieutenant Charles Monroe, had served aboard the Sea Lion 2. For Isaac, this wasn't an expedition, it was inheritance. The dive vessel, Aurora's spine, was equipped with modern sonar arrays, titanium hull plating, and a newly developed acoustic scanner capable of mapping resonance fields instead of mere echoes. The engineers called it a listening net. To Monroe, it felt like building a bridge to ghosts. As they descended past 300 meters, the light died quickly. The crew grew quiet. Every man and woman aboard had read the history. The atmosphere wasn't fear, it was reverence. At 600 meters, the sonar began to flicker. Faint harmonics pulsed across the screen, irregular but oddly familiar. Monroe leaned in. It wasn't ocean noise. It was the same spectral rhythm first recorded in 1945, only now slower, deeper, as if time itself had dragged the sound down. Signal strength increasing, the sonar tech whispered. Origin directly below us. Monroe ordered all engines to halt. The Aurora's spine drifted in perfect stillness. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then, through the sonar headset, came a low vibration. Soft, almost human. It wasn't speech, but it carried cadence. Monroe could swear he felt it in his chest, as though the water itself was breathing. When the ship's lights cut through the black, the crew saw something they couldn't immediately name. The seabed wasn't flat, it rose in ridges like ribs. Embedded between them lay twisted fragments of metal, half consumed by coral and pressure. It looked like the skeleton of a vessel, the sea lion too, but the shape was wrong. The hull seemed stretched, warped, as if it had been pulled in opposite directions before freezing solid. The steel bore no scorch marks, no implosion signatures. It was simply changed. They sent drones closer. The cameras revealed an inscription on a fragment of plating, handwritten, carved into the metal by something sharp. Still listening. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Monroe said nothing. As they circled the wreck, the sonar pulsed again, stronger now. The waveform mirrored itself in real time. Whatever was responding, it wasn't reflecting. It was synchronizing. The ocean floor trembled slightly, stirring a cloud of silt that rose like smoke. From within it, the drone's floodlights caught movement, thin filaments of luminescence weaving upward. They twisted together like strands of silk, drifting toward the submersible, their glow faint but rhythmic. Monroe's engineer, a young technician named Everson, stared at the monitor. "Sir," he whispered, "those lights." "They're following the sonar frequency." He adjusted the scanner. As the frequency shifted, the filaments shifted too, forming spiral shapes that almost looked deliberate, then the feed distorted. Lines crossed the screen, static, blooming. Before the image cut out, a shadow passed in front of the camera, large, shapeless, but undeniably there. The crew recoiled. Systems flickered. One of the external sensors began to pick up faint tapping sounds against the hull, irregular at first, then increasingly measured. "Is that debris?" Everson asked. Monroe leaned closer to the sound monitor. The tapping wasn't random. It carried rhythm. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. A pattern. Morse code. He scribbled on a notepad as he listened. LISTEN. His stomach turned. The lights outside dimmed as the power grid strained. Static burst through the speakers again, followed by what sounded like an echo. Their own sonar pulse returning seconds later, but stretched, lower in tone, as if mimicking them from somewhere far deeper. "Cut transmission," Monroe ordered. The sonar operator hesitated. "If we do, we lose the echo source." "Do it anyway." The hum died instantly. Silence pressed against the vessel. Everyone waited, breath held, as though the sea itself was listening back. Then, faint, barely audible, the sonar console lit again. No one had transmitted. Yet the sound returned. Their system was off, but the echo continued. It was repeating their last pulse. Perfectly. Everson's voice shook. "Sir, it's still answering." The command deck fell into paralysis. Monroe stared into the black window ahead, his reflection merging with the deep. In that moment, he thought of his father, standing in another submersible decades earlier, hearing the same impossible sound. History wasn't repeating. It was responding. Suddenly, one of the drones reconnected, transmitting a single frame before shutting down again. The image was blurred, distorted by pressure, but in the distance behind the wreckage, faint silhouettes seemed to hover. Not solid forms, more like shifting outlines, half light, half shadow, and in their midst, something glowed red. 2 pinpoints, steady, watching. Monroe didn't speak for a long time. The glow pulsed once, in rhythm with the sonar pattern, then faded into blackness. That was when the external temperature sensors began to drop. The surrounding water fell 10 degrees in less than a minute. Frost formed along the glass viewport inside the pressure hull. The ocean was freezing, unnaturally fast. "Surface," Monroe said quietly. Engines roared to life. The sub began to ascend slowly, the creaking of metal echoing through the cabin. The deeper they rose, the more the sonar faded, until finally it stopped. For a moment, relief filled the cabin. Then came the final sound, a single sharp ping. It came from above them. Everyone froze. Sonar only worked in one direction. There was nothing above but empty water. And yet the instruments confirmed it. The signal originated 50 meters overhead, closing in. The noise grew louder, repeating every few seconds. Each ping closer, sharper, more deliberate. Then the lights flickered again. When they finally breached the surface, storm clouds had rolled across the horizon. The sea was boiling with mist. Monroe stepped onto the deck, drenched and shaking, the sonar log clutched in his hand. On the final page, the system had recorded something the crew hadn't transmitted. A final line of data written in binary. When decoded later, it formed a single word: awaiting. The Aurora's spine returned to port, its official report sealed. Monroe never spoke publicly again, but years later his private journal surfaced. The last entry read, "The ocean answers in the same voice you give it. We listened too long, somewhere in the Pacific. When storms roll in and radio channels fill with static, sailors still report faint sonar tones. 3 pings, then silence. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe, beneath the cold weight of that endless water, something still remembers the men who first tried to listen, and is still waiting for someone to speak again."